Thank you very much, Dr. Hamida. It's very good to see that we are located here in Bangladesh. It's geographically the center of the region, and in terms of awareness of our whole South Asian region, I feel that Dr. Hamida's address showed you just how aware we are in Bangladesh of the rest of the world. Which brings me to the far side of the world, as viewed by Mercator. From Japan, may I introduce Ms. Kathy Matsui.
Hello, everybody. It is indeed an honor and an extreme privilege to participate in this very exciting inaugural ceremony launching the Asian University for Women. I'd like to, in the next several minutes, take you down another perspective of equality, of the impact that inequality has from an economic perspective on the world's economies. I'm going to start first with my own background and just explain to you why I came up with this term you're not going to be able to find in the dictionary called Womenomics, and then explain to you a little bit about what we have found in our research about the impact that closing the gender gap in both education and employment, especially in developing economies, especially in this part of the world, can have on long-term economic growth and prosperity. First off, I am a Japanese American. I have worked as an equity strategist. You probably don't know what that is, but I'm supposed to forecast where the Japanese economy and stock market are headed. I have been doing this job for nearly 2 decades. And if any of you know anything about the Japanese stock market during that period of time, you will know that it has been a struggle. Japan's economy and stock market have been struggling for nearly 2 decades. And I can tell you that through various conversations with investors around this world, I am constantly asked by them about the structural challenges that face Japan, especially that challenge of demographics. We have a shrinking workforce population already in Japan. I think a statistic was mentioned earlier about the Italian birth rate. I think Japan is neck and neck with Italy in terms of the birth rate being as low as 1.1 to 1.2. And so clearly, as investors are focused on where they want to allocate their resources, they want to allocate their resources clearly in those economies or those markets where the growth is going to be quite positive. As many of you may know, the growth in any economy is comprised of 2 components. One is capital and the other is labor. And so if you're faced with a shrinking workforce, as Japan is, you have clearly got some challenges long-term about growth. Now, I am actually the only female in Japan, believe it or not, doing my job. And as I struggle with this question time and time again by my investor clients, how is Japan going to cope with this enormous demographic challenge ahead of it? I actually realized after working for so long in Japan that the answer was staring me right in my face. It was the millions of women that I saw every day living in Japan, highly educated, very talented, very capable, but not being fully utilized in Japan's workforce, that they may indeed be part of the solution. So, I am a research analyst, and I began to write research on this topic, and I called it Womenomics, just highlighting the potential of Japanese women. I called Japanese women the country's hidden weapon, to raise greater awareness about the obstacles preventing higher female participation in the workforce, as well as propose some concrete solutions. And through my analysis, I showed that if you could raise Japan's female participation in the workforce, which stands at just around 50%, to the same level of that of males, which is close to 90%, you could, over the next several years, raise Japan's level of GDP growth by as much as 16%. 16% is very, very significant. Now, subsequent to my reports on womenomics, my colleagues around the world have actually taken this up as a theme in their own research. And they have focused on the impact of closing that gender gap, increasing female participation in both developed economies as well as developing economies. And today I thought I'd just take a few moments to highlight some research that was done by my colleague Sandra Lawson, based in New York. She wrote a piece, and if you're interested, I didn't bring copies of it today, but I can give it to you if you come up to me afterwards, called "Women Hold Up Half the Sky." Does anybody know this Chinese proverb? Women hold up half the sky. Well, she titled this report, that Chinese proverb, with a bit of an ironic twist. Because despite the fact that that is a Chinese proverb, it is more aspiration than it is fact. And I just wanted to highlight some of the key conclusions of this piece with you that gives you a bit of context, a bit of numbers to just show you what gender equality could indeed do for much of the developing world. And I'm going to talk briefly about three aspects. Number one are the micro benefits of closing that gender gap. Number two is the macroeconomic implications. And third is how greater investments in female education can actually lead to an important growth premium. In other words, can lift GDP growth for many economies around the developing world. So let me start first with some statistics for you in just illustrating the gender gaps, which I know some of you are very familiar with already in the developing world. And this is not just limited to South Asia or Asia, but also extends across to the Middle East and Africa as well. Now, many of you know that access to education for women in particular around the world has actually made significant progress in recent decades. In fact, in Latin America, the gender gap in education has virtually vanished at the primary level. However, at the primary school level, that gap still persists in a very significant way in many developing countries, especially here in Asia. While enrollment rates for boys are nearly universal, girls are disproportionately still kept out of school. And as Hamida mentioned earlier, many of the girls who do attend primary school in the developing world tend not to complete it. In secondary school levels, the total enrollment rates fall off very sharply. For example, just 3/4 of secondary school-age girls attend school in China, half in India and Bangladesh, and less than 1/3 in Pakistan. Because boys are more likely to continue their schooling, there are roughly 8 girls for every 10 boys in secondary school in countries such as India and Pakistan. At the university level, as you'd expect, overall employment levels again drop sharply for both genders, but especially for the women. For example, in Bangladesh and Pakistan, just 4% of college-age women are in school. For every 10 men in tertiary or university education, there are just 5 women in Bangladesh, 7 in India and Vietnam. Let's then move on to the employment sphere. Once women leave school,